Welcome, everybody. Just waiting for everyone to come in from the waiting room before we get started. Right, I think that's everyone in. No, not quite. Okay. Just before we start, just to say to everyone, we're recording this session so that we can share it with people who aren't able to make it at this point. So just to let you know that that's the case. And so if there's a question that you think might be a bit sensitive, ask it in an anonymous or a semi-anonymous way, because it will be shared. Or if it's really, really anonymous, just let us know and Francis can have a one-to-one moment with you at the end. But anyway, right. Good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to welcome you to this info session on the Fore and our funding, what we do. My name's Rose Gunn, and I am the founder and the chief exec of the Fore. And I just wanted to give a quick introduction before I hand over to Francis and Kay, one of our strategic applicant consultants, who will be giving you much more insight. But I wanted to sort of set the scene and say why I set up the Fore in the first place. So 5 years ago, I'd been working in the charity sector. Sorry, 12 years ago, I'd been working in the charity sector for 5 years. And I had this sort of I was in this weird situation where I was working for a foundation, but actually I was raising money because the foundation had a beautiful house, but it didn't actually have very much funding within it. And I was consequently able to see from both sides of the fence, as in I was working for a foundation, so I was invited into funder conversations, but I was also talking to lots of charities and was fundraising myself, that there was a real gap in the market and there was very, very little funding out there to help young or early stage organizations, small charities and social enterprises to really invest in themselves and do what they needed to do. There was reasonable amounts of project funding, but there was very little support out there for those of you that wanted to make yourselves more efficient, more effective, scale up what you were doing, have more impact. It was all about looking at often kind of payment by results type of funding. So I set up the Fore to give small charities and social enterprises access to that sort of support. And also a key part of it was the wraparound skills support, because something else that we had noticed was that small charities and social enterprises were crying out for different types of skills to help them fill gaps that they might have in either their own as the executive knowledge or the knowledge of the board. And it was really hard to go about meeting the right sorts of people. And I also knew that there was a lot of appetite within the professional sectors to be able to share what they knew with charities that they could really help. So that's why the Fore came into existence. We are very much a small charity ourselves. And so we entirely, I hope, are able to empathise with the challenges you're facing. Funding at the moment is so difficult to get hold of, and we fundraise all of the money that we give away. We fundraise for ourselves. So we are experiencing many of the issues that you are experiencing as well. So with all of that in mind, we have tried to create a process which is really supportive and helpful to you. And it is very competitive, and we are sorry that it's so competitive, but that is defined by the fact that we can only raise a certain amount of money. But what we hope is that for those of you that don't get funding, you will have learned something through applying. So the whole opportunity to spend time with someone like Kay, who you will meet in a second, one of our strategic applicant consultants, will, for those of you that get to the point of spending time with her, you will be able to learn a lot through the sorts of conversations that you have with your consultant who you assigned. And for those of you that don't get that far, we also provide feedback on anything that you give us in terms of the written materials. So hopefully you will be able to learn and move forward and have a more positive experience than applying to a lot of funders. And as you probably are realizing, I do a lot of fundraising, and I know exactly how frustrating it can be when you spend a lot of time on an application and then you don't know why it doesn't succeed. But so anyway, that's why we were set up. That's why we exist. We've now got, I think it's fair to say, quite a lot of experience in doing this. We've got over 500 charities, nearly 600 in fact, charities that we have given support to. We've given away nearly £10 million, and we are also quite expert in providing skills and training. We run lots of non-financial support training programs and do lots of connections with skilled volunteering, all of which, particularly the workshops and the training programs, you get access to whether you get funding or not. So hopefully, while, as I said, it is very competitive in terms of the funding, you're still going away with something that is helpful to you. So I will now pass over to Francis, who will lead the conversation. But thank you very much, all of you, for being interested in what we are doing. And I hope that we will be able to help you in some way.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Mary Rose. So I suppose before we get stuck into hearing a little bit more from Kay, and I suppose the most important part for you is sort of the opportunity to ask questions, I'll just set the scene a little bit for the autumn 2024 funding round. So I'll just basically, for those not familiar with how we do things at the Fore, I'll just run you through the process and some of the key dates to sort of bear in mind. So basically, the first stage for the autumn funding round kicks off next week, and that's basically our registration phase. So that's essentially just registering your interest to apply to the funding round. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's really, really quick. Registrations will be open for a week, and that kicks off from midday next Wednesday, which is the 24th of July. If, as is often the case, there are more registrations than places available, then we will allocate at random. We completely know this isn't ideal, and we wish we could invite everyone to apply who registers an interest in applying. But I think, as Mary Rose alluded to, this is essentially dictated by the amount of funding we've managed to fundraise for the given round. So basically then what will happen after the registration period closes is you will get an email from us letting you know whether you have or haven't been invited to apply to the funding round, and you'll know by the end of Thursday, the 1st of August. So if you've been invited to apply, what you need to do, you'll have up until the 9th of September to submit an application to us. And basically the whole application process has been designed to be as straightforward and unburdensome as possible. We're not asking you to complete really long and complex application forms with tons and tons of questions. Basically, we're asking for a couple of key things to highlight in 3 pages of a Word document that basically gives you the opportunity to sort of set out who you are, who your leadership is in your own words, what your funding ask is for, and how that will have a transformational impact on your organisation itself. We're not looking for amazing design skills in the application form, really fancy formatting. Just get the information in. You don't need to spend lots of time making it pretty. By all means, if you've applied for funding from other places before and you've explained who you are and what you do, copy and paste that in to save you time. So as I said, you'll have up until the 9th of September to get that application in. And then basically what happens after that is we move into stage 1 of the sort of formal assessment process. And that's called initial review. And basically Strategic Applicant Consultants, or I'm going to say SACs from now on, because that's a bit of a mouthful. Our SACs will at that stage basically go through your applications, and 30% of those that applied will be taken forward through to the next stage, which I'll explain in a second. If you're not taken through to the next stage, you'll still get some bespoke written feedback from us, which should hopefully be useful if you decide to apply again to the Fore in the future, or perhaps to other trusts and foundations for similar funding asks. And then for the 30% that do get through, the next stage, stage 2, basically kicks off with an online meeting for those 30% with the SAC. It's an opportunity for the SAC to explore your funding ask, to find out a little bit more about you as an organisation, and also, I suppose, kind of stress test your funding ask, stress test, how you think the funding will be transformational, sort of commenting on it, suggesting areas for improvement, sort of will all depend on the context of your application and of the organization. But you know, the call whether, so then what happens after that is the call will end, you'll get some feedback that will either say, you know, this is where it stops for you now in this given round. However, you will get the opportunity to have verbal feedback from the SACs, and they can give you a little bit more detail about what aspects meant that in this instance you weren't being taken any further, so that hopefully it is useful for you. As I said, just like stage one, you know, useful for you if you want to apply again to us in the future, or if you're applying to other trusts and foundations. So that hopefully that verbal feedback on a call would be very useful. For those that sort of do progress beyond that sort of online meeting, there'll be a bit of back and forth between you and the SAC as they sort of get all the sort of final remaining information they need for you to take you forward to the next stage in the process, which is our funding panels. And our funding panels are made up with a combination of our corporate partners, but also our charity leaders who we funded in the past. And I think having the charity leaders and the corporate partners often looking at very different things, sort of they come together in a nice synergy. And I think the sort of decision making is probably more nuanced than it would be, for example, if it was our corporate partners in isolation or our charity leaders in isolation. And in the final stage is finding out whether or not you're successful for funding. And depending on what stage of the process you get to, you will be able to potentially unlock access to our pro bono network of skilled volunteers who'll be able to provide you advice and support sort of in parallel to the grant funding itself. So yeah, I think that's a very much a whistle-stop tour. If you go onto our website, it'll all be set out in more detail, especially around, you know, what sort of how you can prepare for that stage 2 online meeting for your SAC if you get that far in the process. But yeah, I think that's plenty for the process for now, but hopefully it just gives you a little bit of context. And then Kay, I'd love to bring you in now, if that's okay. So Kay, as Mary Rose said, is one of our strategic applicant consultants. And Kay, kind of before we get into the questions, I suppose maybe kick things off with you and just if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yes, great, Pananda. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to be here. So my name's Kay Polley. I live in North Wales. My main background was that I was running a small charity for 10 years. So I was director of a regional but very small organisation in North Wales. So I've very much been in your position of having to go through the trials and tribulations of fundraising for small and large grants. I now work more in campaigns. So my day job is that I work as head of campaigns for a national organisation. And I've also have a few governance roles. So for the last 6 years, I was on the board of Friends of the Earth. I'm now chair of Reclaim, which is a fantastic organisation based in Manchester, working with working class young people who were actually successful in getting funding from the Fore earlier this year. And I should say I had nothing to do with that decision-making process, just to be very clear. But yeah, and I do a little bit of freelance work as well, kind of supporting fledgling organisations setting up and getting going, really. So yeah, that's me.
Lovely, Kay. Thanks so much. Lots of really sort of useful, relevant experience. And I suppose thinking of your role as SAC, what do you enjoy most about it, I suppose?
It is absolutely phenomenal meeting people from all across the UK just doing amazing things. And I think I am constantly astounded by people. And, you know, I learn a lot through the process. I learn a lot about, you know, completely areas that I've never worked in that I don't know about, geographical areas of work, all sorts of different things. And I'm constantly amazed by what people are doing and how so many people have just seen a need and organised and set something up and are just providing this amazing thing, and quite often in circumstances where they shouldn't have to be doing that, as I'm sure many of you are in now. But I think also being able to you know, work with organisations kind of through the process. So as Francis said, kind of 30% of the organisations whose applications I'll read I have a phone call or a Zoom call with, and that's a really great opportunity to kind of like explore the ideas and maybe kind of think about them a little bit differently and have a really good conversation about kind of next steps. And actually, even for the organizations that aren't successful in going through that third panel round, the feedback call that I have with those organizations is actually one of the, most enjoyable parts for me. Because I think then you can have a really honest conversation about, what was going to work, what maybe wasn't, you weren't quite as confident about. And I can say, well, actually, I've just spoken to another organization who's kind of doing it this way. Have you thought about this? And kind of bring in different elements of my work from all sorts of different things. And just have, like, even though it's maybe just an hour or half hour kind of chat, kind of it just sort of opens up different ideas for maybe particularly for reapplying to the Fore or applying for different funding, or maybe kind of realizing now isn't actually quite the right time for the organization to apply to the Fore, and there's maybe some steps that they want to go through before applying again. So I think that kind of conversation of just like working through thinking about things a little bit more strategically, and hopefully that's a really useful thing for the person from that organization, just to be able to have that conversation with someone who's kind of external to it all, looking at it with a fresh pair of eyes and maybe just thinking of kind of a few new ideas.
Lovely, Kay, thank you. And I suppose the last question from me before we get into the questions from our attendees is, obviously, when we're sort of looking at funding asks, we're looking for the funding ask to have a transformational impact on the organization. And I guess I know from previous experience, people sometimes find it difficult to understand fully what transformation means in the context of the Fore. And I guess, yeah, just from an SAC perspective, what does transformation mean to you and what do you look for?
Yeah. I mean, I think that when I get the applications, there is a complete, I see it as kind of a spectrum in terms of transformational impact. So down kind of right down at one end, there are organizations who, when you kind of look at the finances or kind of where they are right now, it's kind of clear they actually just need this funding to keep going. And they're kind of just trying to keep the doors open. And that's obviously not what the Fore is looking to fund. Then there's kind of the majority fall into kind of the middle bit of that spectrum, where you can see actually the funding would help the organization maybe grow a little bit. It might support plans that are already in place to kind of develop. It might bring some financial security, and the organization would definitely be better off as a result of getting that funding and would be strengthened. It might be that, the CEO isn't having to kind of scrabble around raising that money all the time, and they're a little bit more financially secure, and they're overall in a better place. But actually, the main bulk of what they're doing and how that organization looks is actually quite similar to if they hadn't received the funding. Kind of business as usual to a greater or lesser extent on that kind of spectrum. The people who are right up at the other end are the people who actually, if you looked at that organization today and you looked at that organization after they'd got the funding and they'd done what they wanted to do, it'd be barely recognizable. It would be a completely different organization. So that might mean that they are operating new areas, they've got a different operating model, and they've got a different staffing structure, they've got different sources of income, and they look just very, very different. And I think that's a really key bit, is that it's a kind of a root transformation, a really radical transformation of the organization. And as Mary Rose has said, it is so competitive. We're looking for the organizations that can really, really articulate that just really clearly. And I think for me, quite often, it's almost not even about kind of the actual thing that you want the funding for. That's kind of the bit, that's the practical step that you need to take now. What I'm really interested in is kind of what's that long-term vision? What's that big plan that you've got? So being able to say, not just, okay, we'll get this funding in place, it's going to allow us to do X, Y, Z, and yeah, that's kind of the end of it. It's, okay, what does that unlock for you? What's the next steps? So what is the thing that, quite often it's organizations they're doing a great job, they're kind of getting along, everybody has those kind of challenges that they're facing, and that's all okay, but overall they're pretty stable and they're in a good place. But they've seen this amazing opportunity and they just can't quite do it because maybe quite often it's a lack of capacity, like many people are facing. And if they just had that little bit of funding right now, they'd be able to take up that opportunity, and it would really unlock the next stages for the organization in terms of organizational development. And I think if you're maybe not at that point of actually like really excited about taking the next step for your organization and really genuinely transforming your organization, then maybe the Fore isn't the right fund for you to apply to right now, or maybe it's not quite the right time in where your organization is to get funding from the Fore, because that's really kind of the key thing that I'm looking for.
Thanks, Kay. I think you've encapsulated that really nicely. So thanks very much. And I guess, I think we can throw it open to questions now. So you can either ask your questions out or feel free to drop them into the chat. And so if anyone wants to take it away.
I'll start. I'm Nova from South Wales. What are there things that the Fore won't fund? So are there the things within a project that the Fore wouldn't fund?
No, I don't think so, Nova. I think as long as you can demonstrate how what it is you're asking for the funding for can be transformational, then I don't see there being anything. I think one thing I would say, if it's for a capital project, so sort of works to a building or acquiring a building or something like that, and maybe the Fore's 30,000 is a small part of the overall sum that you need. I think it'd be useful in the application to justify sort of the direct additionality of the Fore's funding. So I think that would be, from my perspective. Kay, I don't know, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Fore funds anything as long as it can demonstrate that that's what will create the transformational impact. I think Francis is right, particularly if it's like, oh, we've got a big project, it's going to cost £200,000 and we need the £30,000 from the Fore to complete it. It's then quite difficult for me to look at that and say, oh, actually the Fore's funding is creating that impact because it's part of that much bigger picture. It's not a hard no on kind of match funding or organizations contributing some of their own money into if that's what you need, but I think you have to be a really clear correlation between that. The Fore's intervention is the thing that is going to cause the transformation for the organization.
Thanks, Kay. And I can see there's a couple in the chat, but I don't know, we can maybe park the chat ones until maybe towards the end if anybody else wants to ask some questions.
I mean, I could answer those questions in the chat because I think they're quite easy answers. In terms of examples of organisations that have already done that, if you have a look on the Fore's website, there's loads of case studies on there. So hopefully that should be able to kind of give you an idea of the kind of thing that the Fore's looking for. And in terms of the specific areas, demographics that the Fore supports, no, is the short answer. So you can apply for kind of, as long as we can, you provide the evidence and you're a great organisation doing great things, then there is no specific demographic that the Fore's looking to support more than others.
Thanks, Kay. And I can see someone has asked, is there a template for the application itself? We don't have a template, but yes, there is a set of things that we ask for. There's 6 or 7 specific things that we ask for. So some of them are, set out your funding ask, set out your leadership, what the organisation does, your targets for achieving the impact that you think your funding ask will deliver. And we also ask to see 3 years of historic financials, if you have them, and 3 years of projected financials. And what I'd say there, that the information that we sort of request is all set out in the apply for funding section of the website. So you can refer to that to get a comprehensive answer. And I can see Dylan has said, what's the maximum grant the Fore provides? Can it be for capital or revenue? So I think we've already answered a bit about what it can be for. It can be for anything. What's the maximum grant the Fore provides? We provide grants up to £30,000. You can have that for 1 year, 2 years, or over 3 years. Joe, if you haven't been going for 3 years, can you still apply? Set up in October 22, but trading properly in August 23. Absolutely. Just make a note in the application as to why you don't have those 3 years. That's absolutely fine. Matt, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so this is my second question. Sorry about that. Hello, Pranam Dar. Right, so yeah, I'm getting the idea, right, that the Fore may be slightly different in terms of kind of responding to the needs of like the community, because like I understand that communities are involved in kind of directing an organization in terms of its transformation, right? But in an application, is it really important to have that community consultation and driven by the community, or are you looking more at kind of just like really strong leadership with ways to transform the organization? Because maybe the community won't understand what the organization will be capable of doing by changing. So what I'm trying to say is the emphasis on like being driven by community need or by the vision of leadership?
So I think either is absolutely fine, but I think what I'm looking for is evidence that that is a credible proposition. So wherever you found that from, then, and when I say evidence, you know, we can maybe talk about that a bit more, but it doesn't have to be loads of stats and data and all sorts. It doesn't have to be a really onerous thing. Like every organization that's applying to us is a small charity or small organization, and we do not expect you to have like really high level loads of stuff. But at the same time, you know, I don't know anything about your organization when I open those 3 pages, and there has to be something there to convince me that actually your proposition is credible. So it could be, yeah, we've done a community consultation and 90 out of 100 people we spoke to said X, Y, Z. It could be we're just outstripped for demand right now. You know, we know there's a need for our services because we're getting all these referrals and we're turning them down. Or it could be, you know, we spoke to these corporate partners who are really interested in working with us, and we've got 5 firm commitments, but actually we don't have capacity to do it right now. Whatever it is, it can be anecdotal, it can be stats, it can be quantitative, whatever it is that you've got. But as long as you're setting out like a convincing case that that is the right next step for the organization, you've thought it through, you think it's got a good chance of working, you don't have to have all the answers at all by now. You might not know all of that, you know, you won't, that's absolutely fine. But as long as you've done a really credible job of kind of looking into all of those and you can present a convincing argument in the application, then that's great, whatever works for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Kay. And Donna, did you want to go ahead with your question?
Yes, please. Good afternoon, all. I'm Donna. I'm from South Wales, and I run a parent carer support group. We're in the process of applying for charity status, and we have a 5-year projection plan at the moment. If allocated funding from yourselves, what kind of other support do you provide?
Yeah, Kay, are you happy for me to answer that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So yeah, so I think for us at the Fore, Donna, I think that sort of pro bono and skills support is just as important as the funding itself, because we think both of them go hand in hand to really sort of fully unleash impact. So there's different types of support we can provide. So basically, from a starting point, if you are successful in getting funding from the Fore, all funded organizations are eligible for one of our free impact courses. So we have 2 different types of impact course, one for organizations that have basically just started out on their impact journey and need a bit of guidance in terms of starting to sort of put the pieces together to set up a framework. And then there's one for more advanced organizations that have already been doing some stuff, but probably need a little bit of help to sort of further flesh out that impact measurement framework. And the reason we offer that for free is because we know, you know, for trust foundations, it's incredibly important to be able to demonstrate your impact, but also for you as an organization, it's important for you to know that what you do works so you can make improvements and refinements if you need to. So that's one aspect. We offer discounted tickets to our training workshop series, and that's around various things from financial management, comms, marketing, partnership building, that type of thing. And then we also have that pro bono volunteer network that I mentioned. I think we've got around 2,000 individuals in that network. They come from a whole sort of range of places, some really big corporates like BlackRock, down to individual people working for themselves. And they can provide support with the whole range of things. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Maybe if you're an organization and you're sort of struggling to get to grips with your governance and your governance arrangement, we'll be able to link you up with someone who can hopefully provide you with that support. Maybe you're experiencing difficulties with financial forecasting. Again, we can link you up with someone with that support. We also can find trustees for you if you're setting up or you want to expand your trustees. Yeah, so there's lots of different bits and pieces of support that we can provide alongside the grant funding. Caroline, did you want to go ahead?
Thank you.
Oh, Caroline, you're on mute. Sorry, we can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep, brilliant. I thought I'd unmuted myself, sorry. Couple of questions. Are the panels regional or are they a national panel? Does it reflect my region if I came in? Would that reflect that? The second thing is there's one of us and there's one of us already that you're funding. If we're doing something very similar to what somebody else is doing that you're already funding, how likely are we? We know it's going to be transformational, but how likely are you to think, yeah, we'll have 2 of those this round?
As in,
Brilliant.
oh, sorry, but can I ask, as in there's another organisation doing a similar thing to you that's applied and is okay. Yeah. You go, Francis.
Good. Well, Kay, I'll take the first bit of the question and I think you can answer the second bit better than me. So, are the panels regional? Sometimes we do regional panels, Caroline. So, for example, in the summer funding round, which we're just coming to the end of, we have a Southwest round that focuses on organisations in Cornwall. And then we also have a Northwest round for organisations based in the Northwest of England. Usually for sort of the other funding rounds we run throughout the year, including the autumn, they're not regional, and we try our best. So basically the way it works is we present 5 organisations to the panel, and we'll always try our best where we can to have a nice sort of regional mix from people coming from different parts of the UK and also different thematic areas that the charity or social enterprise is working in.
On the second question, no, not at all. We only take into account that individual application, so it wouldn't be kind of in relation to any others if we had more or fewer or similar propositions. It's just on the strength of your own application.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Kay. Just checking, so I don't think there's any more questions in the chat. Does anybody else have any more questions?
I do have a quick question, actually, if it's okay. It might seem a little bit left field, but it's about your funding, your fundraising, and then I'm assuming it's invested. And I just wondered if I've not been able to find any information, but I kind of assume that you have an ethical investment policy. Do you know anything about it? Do you happen to know if you've got a policy yourselves? That's
Yeah, I mean,
reassuring sometimes to certain organizations that, you know, I might support.
yeah, I mean, in terms of the sort of mix of funders and where we get our funding from, it's a sort of a mix of, there's some individuals, there's also bigger corporations and sort of smaller organizations as well. In terms of ethical policies, I mean, I know we have something there. I wouldn't be able to quote it to you off the top of my head on this call, but yeah, certainly, you know, we don't just take funding from anyone. We do have certain things that we look into to make sure that we're comfortable with where we're getting the money from, and it kind of aligns with our own values as an organization and the sort of wider values of the organizations that we're looking to fund as well.
Great, thank you.
Anything else?
There's a question in the chat from this. Can the grant include any costs for the skills training you offer?
Sorry, my internet just broke up there. I just wanted to check. Did anybody else have any questions? Kay, I don't know if
there's one in the chat. Do you want to answer the one that's in the chat, Francis? Can you see the one in the chat that's come up? Oh, great. Francis is, don't leave me. This
I'm happy to jump in if that's okay, Kay. Hi everyone, I'm Kelly. I work at the Fore. So the question in the chat, can the grant include any costs for the skills training you offer? So I would say preferably not, just because we want to make sure you can use that £30,000 to ensure that transformational impact on your organisation itself. But one thing I will say, in terms of our skills training and workshops, we really do try our best to keep the cost as low as we possibly can, just because we really do appreciate that cost is such a huge barrier to accessing training. So while we do offer discounts on tickets for organisations that we do fund, we try to keep the cost low for everyone who wants to attend our workshops.
Thanks, Kelly.
That's okay.
Thanks, Kelly. And sorry, I'm back. My computer is not liking me today.
Are there any other questions? Anything that's useful to think about if you're considering applying?
Okay, Francis has just messaged me and said his laptop has given up, unfortunately. So I think so I think if there are no further questions, I think we can wrap up for today. So thank you so much everyone for taking the time to join us for this session, and thank you so much, Kay, for joining as well and for sharing your really helpful insights about what it's like as a consultant and viewing the applications from the other side. And if you do decide to register for our autumn 2024 funding round, as Francis says, registration opens next week on Wednesday the 24th of July at 12 p.m. and that will be open for exactly 1 week, and it will take you around 2 minutes to register. So if you do decide to register and apply, we wish you the very best of luck. Okay, all right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.